Hello, everybody. Welcome to the trans panel for El Camino Pride 2020. My name is Twigs. I'll be your moderator. I go by he, him, they, them. I'm also the GSA president. This is our panelist, so we'll go around. Zoe.
Hi, my name is Zoe. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a camera operator. I work in film and television, and I haven't been in school for 15 years, so I'm the old lady here.
Ari.
Hi, my name is Ari. My pronouns are they, them. I am currently a FedEx office worker and I bake on the side.
Mandy.
Yeah, I'm Mandy. My pronouns are they, them. I am a paramedic in Australia. I also haven't been in school for like 10 years, so I'm up there with you.
Maggie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maggie. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm an LGBTQ health educator in LA.
Fantastic. So, we've received questions from the community, quite a few actually. So let's get started. So the first question that was asked was, how can allies better advocate for trans people in schools?
Is it okay if I start?
Yeah, just go ahead.
Okay. Honestly, I think the number one way an ally can help trans people is to uplift their voices, offer protection when they can, and like genuinely just be a listening ear. Don't shut down someone when they're trying to expand and like experiment and figure themselves out, because as soon as you are the type of person to say no, well, you were this before, why are you this now, you've automatically severed a connection that you could have sort of grown and developed and like help support them with.
Nice, I think that's a good answer. Does anyone have anything to add?
I think another part of it is like what teachers can do and the environment that they can create in their classrooms. Whether that's like starting at an early age or even professors in college classrooms, just opening up the conversation around like gender diversity and different like aspects of the LGBTQ community, as well as like our history too.
Nice. Anything else to add before we go to the next question?
So forgive me if my if my answer is a little bit out of date, but at least when I was in school, there was an issue. It was difficult to get professors to use our chosen names and our pronouns, and to do it in a way that was opaque, so that they wouldn't actually see, our given names or our given gender identity, pronouns, that is. And so I feel that I don't think that that's the case everywhere, and I think a lot of schools could benefit from improving that.
I agree. Would you guys think like some sort of system in place to change that without having to actually go up to the teacher? Be good.
I know sorry to talk again. I know back at my university, they had this system where some teachers started implementing this system where you could, on the sheet for like syllabus week, you could give a sheet back with like a nickname that you would want to be called, or like basically you can use that as your preferred name, and then not only do you have coverage for yourself in case you're not out yet, but the teacher will address you by that without addressing you by your birth name.
But that was something that specific teachers were implementing, not like a school-wide policy, right?
Yeah, it was not school wide, but the LGBT organization at my university was pushing for it, and I was seeing it expand more and more, especially within the humanities section. I never went to anywhere like the STEM area, so I don't know what the professors in those specific zones were doing. But when it comes to the subjects of like languages or English or theater or things like that, those teachers were very active and interactive with the LGBT office on campus. So there was like a system in place where allies were not trying to be performative, but they were trying to be actually genuinely helpful. Again, I'm not sure how much it's grown since then, but it's just, oh, if you were not comfortable with coming out quite yet, you can put down a nickname and we'll call you by that. Or you can just put down your preferred name. And it was always during syllabus week where no one really knew you yet, so no one could call you by your wrong name first.
Yeah, it's basically like that nowadays, honestly. So the next question that was asked was, what are some of the hardships you face due to being trans?
Do they want like an itemized list or?
Yeah, bullet points.
Come back next week for my lecture.
Okay, just like maybe the most recent one.
I mean, I suppose I could start. In the past, I've been denied employment because I'm trans and told as much because there's no protection, no, liability for the employers. At least there was at the time. I don't know if it's changed in California since then. And, common stories, my parents were not supportive and, threatened to pull my tuition when I was a student. And I've been harassed at work when I did have jobs and had no real recourse at the time. Things have changed a little bit, and fortunately, I've been working with a lot of good people who are much more supportive and try to create a safer environment to work. But things still happen, and
Anyone else?
Mandy, you said you had a list. I just want to hear one thing.
It's much along the same lines. Well, not so much non-supportive parents, non-understanding parents and family who aren't up to date with things, and just that general unease with work. Work is a lot better nowadays than what it ever has been historically, but there is still that unease for, well, lots of members of the LGBT community. Um, so.
Okay. And a follow-up question to that would be, how would you feel would be the best way to alleviate those issues? And what could allies do?
I think much like Ari said before, just making more noise, as it were, like letting more voices be heard and having the voices that are being heard be the voices that say this isn't abnormal. This is something that's normal.
Okay, I think that's good.
there are also organizations, at least one that I know here in the state is the National Center for Transgender Equality. And you can find them at transequality.org. And they have a lot of good resources for finding ways to advocate on behalf of trans people and to find information about your rights state by state here in the States. I don't know if there are similar resources such as that in Australia. But yeah, I've found that to be a really good resource.
Nice. Okay. Any anything you guys want to add before I go on to the next question?
I guess sort of piggybacking off of those two topics, just constructing a support net, and then like working with those organizations like the ones Zoe mentioned, and if you can, just staying aware and making sure your friends are also aware, because when it comes to progress made in legislation, oftentimes the T is left behind, and it can be frustrating because in a sense you do have some, like, in a sense, like, depending on where you land on the spectrum, maybe you have some rights, but because of this one thing being sort of left behind constantly when laws are being made, or even just being the protections even being taken away, it feels like you've taken one step forward and two steps back.
And just to add one other thing, for allies, an important thing is to like put your money where your mouth is. To support trans folks, their art, their books, their like all of that. Make sure that you're putting your money where your mouth is and supporting folks both financially and verbally.
Nice. Okay, the next question is it's a two-parter again. What is non-binary?
I can go. So in our current like society, we often see things as a binary male or female. So someone who's non-binary identifies outside of that spectrum. Some folks could identify like with partial identities in those two categories. Some folks identify completely outside of it. Yeah, so there's a lot of different things that can be non-binary. It's not just like one identity.
Okay. Does anyone want to add anything?
Non-binary is definitely something that I sort of latched onto when I found out how wide and expansive a spectrum it was. And it's not just, oh, you're gender fluid, oh, you're androgynous, oh, because when it comes to gender expression and how it sometimes crosses over with things like your perceived gender and things like your race and like how your outward expression, things can get a lot more murky. So non-binary is essentially, for me specifically, is more like an absence of gender when it comes to my presentation or to my expression. But it's not the same for everybody.
Right.
I don't personally identify as non-binary. My pronouns are she and her, but my presentation is definitely masculine. And so having that mix of, my gender identity and my gender expression being so different, I suppose, puts me in terms of gender expression somewhere in the non-binary universe, I suppose. But I think for those who identify as non-binary, this question is more for you.
Yeah. Real quick, just for people who don't know, what's the difference between gender expression and gender identity?
Gender identity is who you are, whether you within yourself see you as male or female or neither or both. And gender expression is how you present yourself from day to day, like how you dress, how you wear your hair, whether you wear makeup or whether you have a beard or things like that.
Okay.
Also how you interact with society, I suppose, how you present yourself socially.
Okay. Anything? Oh, yeah, it's a two-parter. So how does a non-binary person transition?
That depends on entirely on what they want when it comes to their own identity and their own version of expression. Some people who are non-binary go on hormones, even though they don't necessarily even though they don't necessarily go into the man or woman sort of umbrella. Some people who are non-binary simply go for some people go to cosmetic surgery. Some people go for things like binders or like bras and like fillers and things like that. So it really depends on how they want to express themselves when it comes to transitioning. Some non-binary people do absolutely nothing to like physically transition. Some of them are comfortable in their body as is, and they're just, this is who I am, this is how I express myself, and I am non-binary, which is I think kind of where a lot of controversy comes in, because a lot of people have been saying non-binary is like woman light, and it's a little frustrating because it also erases people who are maybe assigned male at birth who are non-binary. So it's transitioning for being non-binary is not always even a part of the identity, is what I would like to say.
Okay.
Were you gonna?
Oh, I was saying anything to add.
I was just gonna say that tends to be the tendency in oppressed communities to further oppress communities with like sub-communities within. And I feel like the tendency to be exclusionary and to say, oh, you're not trans enough, or like, oh, you don't actually fall within the umbrella, is an unfortunate side effect of that. And I think we need to, as a whole, be more accepting and more inclusive of other people. For example, the way I present myself, yes, I mean, like I've physically transitioned, but then my expression is masculine. And so some people look at me and they say, like, you're trans, like, how are you, you're not trans enough, is the perception that some people have of me. Like, when I was first transitioning, people would ask me, why transition at all? Like, if you're attracted to women and you don't want to present yourself in a particularly feminine way, what's the big deal? And I think that's primarily ignorance. And I think it's the same kind of ignorance that leads people to be exclusionary of non-binary people now.
Any other notes on how non-binary people transition? Nope. Okay. The next question is, what is socially transitioning?
I can go ahead. So socially transitioning is like transitioning amongst your like social circles. So it's different than medically transitioning or legally transitioning. It can look like changing your name, using different pronouns, changing your gender expression. Yeah, and there's a lot of other ways that it can look like too.
Okay.
Maggie, you don't include changing your name and changing your identification as part of social transitioning?
Wait, say that one more time, sorry.
Oh, it sounded like you excluded changing your name and changing your identification from socially transitioning. You said legally transitioning as like a subcategory, I suppose.
Yeah, so for me, socially transitioning means like using a different name and pronouns amongst other people. And then the legal side of it would be like navigating those legal systems to get it changed on paper. Yeah.
So would you say that then there's 3 types of transitions? Medical, social, and legal?
I think there are like many different facets of transitioning, but if you want to like, I don't know, make it a lot simpler, I think that those would be the 3 that I would identify. I don't know if anyone else has other thoughts.
Does anyone else have, as Maggie was saying, asking, what are your guys' experiences?
Anyone? I feel like I'm talking a lot.
Well, I'm the moderator, but I could talk a little bit. I've only started medically transitioning fairly recently. And I do kind of agree that social and legal, legal transitioning, that's a little bit more scary and serious. So I haven't done it yet. But I would think that legal transitioning would be kind of like a subset of social transitioning.
Social transitioning is kind of, it's a little bit difficult in my position, not because I'm worried about being like kicked out, but because like the conversations I would have to have, me knowing who I would have to have them with, I'm not sure if I am mentally prepared to handle the extent those conversations would go to. So I have an older sister who is a lesbian, and she has a very sort of older lesbian style of thinking. So the first time she caught me with my binder, she automatically assumed that I would be F to M transitioning. And I didn't want to, I told her that that was not the case, but she still has suspicions every time I wear my binder. And I've already sort of tried to explain androgyny, of which it didn't get anywhere. So it's, people can still be accepting to an extent, but when it comes to their own understanding, it's 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 really on them at some point, because you can only explain so much.
That's true. Mandy, do you have anything to add?
Just like piggyback onto Ari as well. It's like, yeah, you can only explain so much, and at the end of the day as well, we're limited in that regard by other people's experiences. So if there are only experiences of this very small box of what a non-binary person who's socially transitioning looks like, then, well, you're buggered, because they've only got that small box, and they're going to try and squash you into it, when in reality the box is much, much larger, probably more like a rectangle.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely looks like no 2 people transition the same way. Any further questions before I move on to the next one? No? Okay. So we talked about this a little bit, but how does being trans affect your work? So let's go around. Zoe, I know you were talking about how does that affect being a camera operator?
So, I mean, I talked a little bit earlier about how I've missed out on work before because of my trans identity. People being confused or uncomfortable and expressing as much and saying, oh, I don't want to work with her because she makes me uncomfortable. And not to digress too much, but I feel that transition is something that continues throughout your life. It's not something that has an endpoint. And so earlier on in my transition, I did present a little more femininely. Like I had long hair. I would pad my bra a little bit. But now I'm kind of in this more kind of masculine space. And I found that it's actually been easier because on one level, people who I don't particularly want to engage with misgender me within their heads and then don't give me a hard time. But at the same time, I do have to decide, okay, is this person important to me? Do I want to, um, call attention to my trans identity and talk to them and say, hey, this is who I am. These are my pronouns. Please use them when addressing me. And it's uncomfortable in a situation where you try to avoid calling too much attention to yourself. Prior to being a camera operator, I was what's called a camera assistant, and that's definitely much more of a you don't want to call attention to yourself kind of job. You're there to facilitate things and to not be seen. Like if you're doing your job well, no one knows you're there. And to have to say, oh, by the way, my pronouns are she and her, that is all of a sudden becomes a conversation. And so that's mostly how it affects my experience. But I fortunately have the privilege of not feeling too burdened by being misgendered. It hurts and I hate it when it happens. But at the same time, I guess like as I've gotten older and feeling more mature and more secure in myself, it hasn't bothered me as much. And so the effect that it has on me at work is not as great.
Okay. Ari, how does it work with being a FedEx officer?
So I just started this job a few months back, and I have told absolutely no one about it. Not one person. I before the quarantine hit my location, I think I told exactly one coworker that I was gay, and that's it. So when I've kind of heard she, her pronouns my whole life, but my dysphoria doesn't come in the format where it's outside people. My dysphoria comes in where it's all coming out of me. And looking at me and thinking about myself is where my dysphoria sort of rests and like attempts to devour me. So it's not debilitating at work. I would very much enjoy it if I could just sort of come out and have people call me by my they them pronouns. But it's not really to a point where it's eating away at me. So like
Andy?
Well, obviously I work in healthcare. I'm a paramedic, so frontline. I work in a relatively small community. And when I say relatively small, we're talking 1,000 people in town. Very rural, mostly old school. So while a lot of them know, well, they all know me as she, her. Many of them have known me since I was a young girl. And that gets to a point where when I came back, I realized in myself as there was no point in trying to change that. So I haven't tried. Because for many of them, they've seen me grow up. They've seen me go away and come back, and I'm always going to be that set of pronouns, regardless of how I dress and how I express myself, whether I express myself as slightly more masculine on certain days, because I do tend to identify as more gender fluid rather than something else. So a lot of them see that, and a lot of them will take that as part of my personality rather than anything else. And to be honest, that works. It saves a lot of headaches. And it's just a lot easier for me to do that in terms of work. Yeah, I got to respond to people regardless. I'm the only paramedic they've got, so they don't really get a choice. But I haven't had any issues with work specifically. There are certainly things that they can work on. One of my biggest gripes is that there's no they, them on our paperwork. It's him, she, her. But I mean, that's a work in progress, and we've got LGBT like cohorts in the workplace that are actively trying to make things happen in that space, and there are quite a large number of us, so I think it's only a matter of time before those sort of changes start happening.
Maggie, how does it affect your work?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yes. How does being trans affect your work?
Okay. So I fortunately am able to like be out at work because I do work for a queer program. I think the other side of that though is I do work with a lot of like queer and trans young folks. So some of their stories and traumas kind of align with my own from my past. So I think that's like the hardest part of being non-binary and working for a queer program. Yeah.
All right. I might add on to this if that's all right. So I worked as a paleontologist for the the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County in the invertebrate paleontology department. They didn't know I was trans. So they did use she, her pronouns for me at the time. It was more, I didn't want to risk not getting the job by coming out beforehand. And then once I got in there, it was like, when do I tell them? It's getting really late into telling them. I've known them for 3 years. And I've been trans the whole time. When do I tell them? So it became kind of a game where I would like leave clues. And I think they thought I was a lesbian. But they were very accepting of that. But because of the work I was doing, identity doesn't necessarily matter as much. It doesn't matter if you're a man, woman, non-binary. Doesn't matter if you're abled or disabled. As long as you can do the work and you can do it fast, it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, you're just kind of a name on a piece of paper that just goes into a drawer with hundreds of thousands of others with pieces of paper with names on them. So it doesn't necessarily matter. Which is very nihilistic, but also kind of comforting at the same time. So I don't think I would face any backlash. I know that the museum's doing a lot of efforts to include trans people, including having non-binary bathrooms available to the public. And I know my workplace, we had 2 single-seater bathrooms that when I was there, they had male and female signs on them, which they removed eventually to just put neutral on both of them. Yeah, it didn't necessarily affect my work all that much. But again, I wasn't out, so I don't know 100%. So the final question is, I'm just going to ask, since we mentioned it, So some people might not know what dysphoria is. So could you guys please explain what dysphoria is? So I know Zoe, you brought it up.
I believe actually it was Ari that brought it up.
Oh, okay, pardon me. Ari, do you want to explain what dysphoria is? Oh, they're away from keyboard. So
I suppose I could speak to it anyway. It's not a term that I actually use very often. It's something that came up a lot when I was first starting transition or pre-transition and seeing therapists and having to talk about it. And I don't know how much all the terminology has changed in the last 20 years, but as I understood it at the time, it was about the way that the difference between the way you perceive yourself and the way that the society perceives you affects you emotionally, and the trauma that is caused by that, and what kind of neuroses and effects that has on you.
Sorry, what was the question?
the question is, what's dysphoria?
Oof. I think when dysphoria is, there are a few types. There is gender dysphoria, there is body dysphoria, and there are other types that I have not self-encountered myself. When it comes to at least my personal experiences with dysphoria, or at least what I've been told by other people, how they feel about it, it can be anything from feeling out of body to feeling like you're not, well, out of body is in a sense where you are just removed from yourself, or it can be like everything that you see on yourself looks wrong, it feels wrong, it sits wrong. It's like it's just everything is off. I've had some people tell me that they're just, how they feel about dysphoria is it's like everything in the room is off center, but like an inch, versus some people who experience dysphoria where they completely shut down. So the severity of it and how people manage it, or how it manifests, varies from person to person, if they even have dysphoria. So I guess what I would say is that it's a feeling of wrongness in self or in body.
And like Ari sort of touched on there too, much like everything else, I think dysphoria is very much a spectrum. So you do get that like very low sort of levels of dysphoria up to and including complete shutdown. And for me personally, I was definitely down the lower end. I still am down the lower end. I don't experience a lot of dysphoria that comes from myself as such, but when I put my binder on, I get what I suppose they would call like euphoria. Is like you put it on and then things are right. And so that's another facet. And so whilst people might not experience dysphoria as such, they might experience that when they actually do make changes to how they express themselves. And that's another aspect of the same thing.
Maggie, do you want to add anything?
Sure. So I agree with Ari that there are like different forms of dysphoria. I think a big one is like social dysphoria, which is kind of when people around you perceive you as a gender different than the one that you identify with. Yeah, and I think another part of the conversation is that some folks don't realize that what they're experiencing is dysphoria until they experience that euphoria. Yeah, and I think that's been like really helpful in how my mind frames things.
Can I elaborate?
Yeah.
I feel that my experience, for example, is that it was always there and you always had that as part of your life and who you are. And then until you do have any kind of relief from it, you think that's just the way life is. And I mean, it always comes back to, you know, some people are like, want to know, why must trans people transition at all? What's so important about that? And this is really what it comes down to, because the only treatment for this kind of experience that is so negative and so debilitating for so many people is to transition, whether that means medical, whether that means social, whether that means legal, whether that just means wearing a binder, or that means, you know, getting surgery of some kind. It's the only way to treat that experience.
Can I add a personal experience real quick?
Yeah, of course.
So this is just like my experience. I don't speak for anyone else, but I've noticed that for myself, like with chest dysphoria, that when I put on a binder, it helps a lot with that. But as soon as I take the binder off, I feel like the dysphoria is worse than before I put it on in the first place. And that's just like my experience with it.
Interesting. Yeah, I can't wear a binder because I have scoliosis, but I do wear like sports bras and stuff like that. For whatever reason, with chest dysphoria, it feels better not to have anything on. Like, if I don't think about it, it's just whatever. But I also have ADHD, so it's kind of like everything in front of my face. That's what's most important.
I know. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's okay.
I was just going to say, for me, my experience when I was much younger was that there were moments where you forget that this is your experience. You don't think about your gender, but the way that our society is set up, it happens that you get reminders constantly. And I think people who are cis don't understand this part of the experience. They don't understand, you know, that our language itself is gendered. You know, the way that we talk about people, the way that we interact, the bathrooms that we use. I mean, if I can go back to the talking about work, I'm always working with different people all the time. You know, jobs for me could last a day, they could last 3 months, they could last, you know, 9 months on occasion, but really a very short period of time compared to other people's work generally. And that means I'm always working with different people. Fortunately, often I can work with a lot of the same people. And so I have advocates with me who know me and are able to help create a safe environment for me. But at the same time, we don't have a designated workplace, so there's no designated restrooms. There's no like single occupant restrooms that are always available. For example, often if we're in a studio, there's a men's room and a ladies' room. And I go to the ladies' room and people sometimes give me looks. Often they don't. I've fortunately found that the women that I work with tend to be a little bit more tuned in to who I am. And if they weren't sure before, seeing me in the ladies' room tends to solidify things for them. But at the same time, you know, there will be times where I go into the restroom and, you know, for some reason, it's always the background actors. I don't know why. But the background actors, you know, get all kind of upset about me being in there and they don't understand what's going on. And I tend to avoid confrontation there, unfortunately. Like, I like to confront things on my own terms. And so I have a lot of practice coming out of work and talking to the people and talking about my gender, my identity, and my pronouns. But at the same time, I don't speak when I'm in a bathroom. Like the most discomfort that I have and the most, I guess, dysphoria that I experience now as somebody who started transition 20 years ago, like most that I experience now is still when I go to the bathroom, because I go to the movies, I go to, a restaurant or whatever, I go into the bathroom, and I feel like as soon as I open up my mouth for any reason, I'm a target. And so I think that fear of being targeted is my experience with dysphoria.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like at El Camino, they have the gender neutral bathrooms in most buildings, but they don't have one in the humanities building. So when I was doing my humanities classes, I would walk like way across campus to the nearest one. And because it's so far away compared to the other more binary bathrooms, I would miss more lecture time in order to go to the bathrooms that made me comfortable. So yeah, I know what you mean. I hated going in the binary bathrooms, so I avoided as much as possible.
And it's an equity issue. Not having access to a bathroom makes it so that you are able to participate less in your education.
Yeah, that's something that we could definitely work on, but I guess that's something we could have added to the bath. What could allies do is make more bathrooms.
Also, make the bathrooms everywhere. I've noticed this that where, the university will say, oh, we had gender neutral bathrooms, and it's like in one building, separated from all the other buildings, so you have to walk, like what you did, like walk super, super far just to go use the bathroom. And it could be avoided if you just had several of these bathrooms in every building. It probably wouldn't even take that long to just chip off the gendered markers on like odd numbered floors on each building and call it a day. But you have to have an administration that's willing to put in the effort, and you have to have an administration that cares enough to realize that this is the issue, and this isn't just affect, it's not just even with like gender neutral bathrooms, what people don't realize is that sometimes it isn't just it extends out to every person's trans experience, but it says people can use them too, and also not be targeted, or feel a bit more comfortable. So it's a little annoying.
Yeah.
It's especially ridiculous when you have single occupant bathrooms that are labeled male or female, when
Yes.
there's absolutely no reason for that.
It's crazy. Like, but they'll have this gigantic bathroom marked family, which is the one that people are most likely to use. But then you feel awkward because you have all this space, and then over there on the left is just a changing station and
the little baby toilets.
yeah.
But once again, it feels exclusionary. It doesn't feel like a space that's meant for us. It's meant for, people and their kids.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think even if it's just like a porta potty, it's something.
Oh, at work all the time, we'll have the porta potties. They'll have what's called the honey wagon, and it has 4 porta potties, and they'll put just on them, they'll say men and women on the individual porta potties. And I understand that the idea is they want to make sure that that men and women have access to the bathroom, that there's not like a big rush of one gender or the other, and then not allowing people. But at the same time, they could just as easily have a gender neutral one. They have 4. Why not?
Well, are they just like paper signs?
Yeah, so I could theoretically be an anarchist and take it down and say, ah.
or print out your own just neutral.
But it's also my place of work, so
Yeah.
I don't want to cause a fuss, you know.
See, that's another thing allies can do. They can be the person that tears it down.
Yeah. There we go. Because they won't get in trouble.
Mm-mm.
I'm sorry, I'm just in shock that they're gendering porta potties of all bathrooms.
I know, right?
Like the absolute worst bathroom you could have, the absolute worst bathroom experience you could have, and it's gendered. I cannot. I can't.
Mm-hmm.
I think when cis allies do help in that way, they have the privilege of not having the additional target of being like, oh, so why did you do that? You know, oh, you're trans. Oh, you know, trans people are such troublemakers. You know, like oh, they're such a pain in the butt. I never want to hire another trans person. You know, if allies can kind of help and help also be the squeaky wheel. And not just leave it entirely up to us. There's, I mean, to be fair, there's not a lot of us by comparison. You know, we're not a huge portion of the population. It seems to be larger and larger every day. Definitely when I was young, I didn't know any trans people my age. It seemed like they were all much younger or much older than me. And so it definitely felt really small. And now it seems like it's getting bigger and bigger. And I think it's partially because of the way that we've been exposed. But getting back to what I was saying, we need allies. We can't do it on our own. And so we need our cis allies to speak up and help us, because we're not going to succeed if it's just us.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I know that I've seen online where it says that the pressure of possibly being the only trans person the workplace would ever know of, there's a lot of pressure of, I need to be the best trans person that they know, because I want to make sure that they're able to hire more trans people in the future. But at the same time, personally, and Ari and Mandy can attest to this, I'm an awful person.
I don't think you want to say that on something that's being recorded and put on the internet for posterity.
That's true. But I'm awful and I make horrible jokes constantly. And that I would be the person to tear down the sign or print out another one, or God forbid, print out a bunch of signs so that all the bathrooms are trans so that cis people can't use the bathroom. And that does weigh on me a little bit, where I think, oh my God, they're gonna think every single trans person is like this now. When in reality, most trans people are a lot calmer than I am. I'm just a crazy person.
I think that most people have an image in their head of who a trans person is if they've never met one before. And I don't think it's you. I don't think it's what, I mean, I honestly, and I think that even if, you know, you're this noisy anarchist, I think it still expands people's views of what a trans person is. And so I think you are representing our community well.
Oh, thank you.
I think if I do have to add anything to the first question about what allies can do to help piggy this conversation, is more allies absolutely do need to be anarchists. Not in the sense where they are terrorizing people, but in the sense that where they're like them questioning their cisgendered and like their guidelines for being cisgendered, because with with things like the bathroom issue like Zoe deals with, who do have cisgendered women who look very masculine, they're also target along with trans women. So by being a trans ally and like boundaries on your own and of what gender expression or gender identity is, and testing and experimenting and finding what you like and going for it, and also supporting and uplifting trans voices and providing a safety and support net, you can sort of like go nuts, just be an anarchist.
To be clear, at least when I was speaking, I meant anarchy facetiously, not literally, for anyone who's going to watch this and think, oh.
The transgender communists.
Oh, yeah, then we're in a whole other realm.
Yeah, those activities undertake at your own risk. There may be consequences.
But what I mean by anarchy is just like, I've seen small demonstrations of it sometimes online where maybe someone is coming out as trans at school and like a bunch of their friends will like, if they get removed from the school, a bunch of their friends will like protest. They'll like do a hallway sit. They won't participate in class. They'll like petition. Like they'll go against the status quo, sort of anarchy, because in support of their friend or in support of this student who was treated unfairly. So absolutely tear off those signs from the porta potties, essentially, if you are a cis.
Yes, it's ridiculous to have paper signs on a porta potty.
I would categorize what you're describing, Ari, as actually exercising your democratic rights as opposed to behaving as an anarchist. I'd say actually it's quite democratic.
I do agree entirely. That is what that is. But also, please consider that.
I'm just trying to steer us back into this like law-abiding. As opposed to like down with government kind of concept that I think this could be misconstrued as.
Yeah,
okay, but like if the government says no to being trans, technically it is down with the government.
As it's down with the government as it is, if you will, then maybe down with the representatives who are working against the interest of their constituents.
We're making positive change.
So call your representatives like once a week and tell them to cut that crap out.
Now, once again, I would definitely suggest that people go to transequality.org. They have a lot of resources and links that you can go and contact representatives in states that are considering laws such as banning medical assistance for trans people who are trying to transition, which I was just looking at it yesterday. I said, oh, this is a thing that people are actually doing or actually considering. Like I had no idea. So I think a lot of people don't even know what kind of things that state and sometimes the federal government are actually trying to do to oppress trans people.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for taking your time out of your day to do this. We did run a little bit over.